Continuing with our agenda, we are on discussion item letter A, State Board of Education staff update. Michelle McGowan and Claire.
It's like a cousin of St. Elmo's.
We are back in reset. We are back on the agenda.
Thank you, Superintendent Retz. Good morning, board members. I believe it was Dr. Oliver who had asked for a summary of all of the new legislation that was enacted this past session after we had sent out one-page summaries. So we sent you a high-level summary, which was embedded in the agenda. And I thought I would just walk through it quickly to highlight those areas where there is going to be, at some point, State Board of Ed involvement or action. And I'd be happy to address specific questions. So referring to the document that was in your agenda, the very first item would be House Enrolled Act 1004, which is a new pre-kindergarten pilot that was enacted this session. And the State Board of Ed has one action item it must take, which is to approve a new kindergarten readiness assessment, which will be informed by the work of the previously existing Early Learning Advisory Committee that was created last year, and that has a good cross-agency representation, including Charlie Geyer from the Department of Education. In addition, the State Board of Education has to consult with FSSA, which is the state agency responsible for implementing the pilot, prior to issuing final guidance, as well as identifying a provider or research scientist to help assist in the design and implementation of a longitudinal outcome study, which is a required component of 1004. So that's the summary there. FSSA, which is referred to here as the office, is required to make an annual report by November 1st each year regarding the outcomes of that study. The next enrolled act is 1028, also referred to as adult high schools. And this is a modification to language that was placed into statute last year. It actually renames what were previously referred to as dropout recovery high schools. So these are charter schools that serve students who have previously dropped out and decided to return to get their diploma. And it now requires that the State Board of Ed has to adopt an alternative accountability system for these schools that establishes rigorous academic outcome criteria, measures college and career readiness outcomes for each graduate, and also requires that a substantial majority of graduates who might receive waiver diplomas from these schools must also be on track to or will have already received an industry certification in a career pathway recommended by the Indiana Career Council. So that is a slight modification to what language that existed that was put into place last year. And given the work that's currently underway to revise the existing K-12 system, I think it's more likely that this would come to you after that work is done so that the alternative accountability system could reflect any new requirements in high school that the board might adopt at some point in future. The next bill to discuss is House Enrolled Act 1213, and this is regarding the CTE diploma bill, which is actually going to be coming to the board next year. By October 1st of 2015, the State Board of Ed is supposed to consider any required changes to the Core 40 diploma. And this is all work that is going to be staffed by the Indiana Career Council. The superintendent is a member of that, as well as the Commission for Higher Education, Department of Workforce Development, et cetera. So all those entities that would want to weigh in and be a part of that. So that is House Enrolled Act 1213. And again, that work really will be coming next year toward the board. The next one is 1388, which relates to teacher preparation programs. And again, starting in next year, there's going to be a role played by the State Board of Education and in conjunction with the Department of Education, Commission for Higher Education regarding teacher preparation programs. Senate Enrolled Act 91, which we've referred to on numerous occasions as that relates to our college and career ready standards. So I will not belabor that as we presented that to you several times. Senate Enrolled Act 2005 has two components. One is that all authorizers in the state of Indiana are now required to make sure that they submit an annual report to both the department and the State Board of Education. Last year, there was some new authorizer accountability language that was enacted that has a greater role for the State Board of Education in holding authorizers accountable for the performance of their charter schools. In addition, there was another component to Senate Enrolled Act 205 related to turnaround academies that specifies what happens at the end of the board-directed intervention. And as laid out in the summary, one of the options could be to continue with the intervention, to return the school to the school corporation, or to have it apply to an authorizer to receive charter school status. Senate Enrolled Act 321, which is charter network funding. This is related to those charter school organizers, which is the nonprofit holder of the charter that operates more than one charter school, may receive money at the organizer level that it can distribute across its different schools, very much like a district does today. And then the last one is Senate Enrolled Act 363, which is related to the complexity index. The largest role here is the Department of Education, but it also says that the State Board of Ed may adopt emergency rules related to that. That's the summary. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer your questions, but we will be collaborating closely like we always do with the department on setting agendas and making sure we're putting stuff on the agenda in advance so we can be talking before you take action. Seeing no questions, I'll turn it over to Michelle for the KEEP contract.
The 2013 budget bill provides a line item for the state board to enter into a contract with KEEP. And in September of 13, the board, through board staff, entered into a contract with KEEP that had basically 5 specific items and a catch-all, but changes in the school funding formula, trends in free and reduced lunch program and free textbook program, ADM and high school graduation trends, for outcome-based incentive funding and linkages to the state school accountability law, and 5, review of the primetime grant outcomes. And again, there's a catch-all for any other topics that the board requests, which no other topics have been specifically requested. There has been a delay in that report. KEEP needed to enter into a data share with the department. There were some concerns about whether the data share and the way that it was worded was complied with FERPA. And in the last few weeks, basically, I have been interacting with the department's legal team to explain that we did think that the data share would be compliant with FERPA. However, both staffs have recommended some alternate mechanisms for achieving a data share arrangement that everyone would be comfortable with. And I'm confident that we will soon be able to get that data share completed, and we'll be able to move forward with getting the report to the board. So I apologize for the delay.
Thank you very much, Michelle. The next item, letter B, lead partner monitoring updates. Teresa Brown, our Director of Outreach. I want to thank you, Teresa, for all your service. I know you have been out and about around the state. So thank you very much.
Good morning. And Dr. Freitas, let me just say that it's our intention to be easily checked off your list as well.
Should I do it right now?
Absolutely. Check us off.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. And, see you next month.
So if I could have George Washington, our lead partners, which actually is the George Washington staff if they're here, Annette from Voyager, and Scholastic, Megan, I think you're here, and any other lead partners that might be present, or school staff, if you could be up here so that they have questions. We're all kind of together. I'd appreciate it. TNTP as well. Okay. So we have functioned as partners all year, so I thought it was important for them to be here with me to help answer your questions that you might have. So I'm going to start off by talking about the monitoring and the oversight process so that you have an understanding of what's informing the information I'm giving you today. So first of all, there have been many site visits. The outreach coordinators, as well as myself, I've done classroom observations as well. Our Title I group also visits these schools, and we are in communication with one another. So actual on-site visits, meetings with the administration team, meetings with the lead partners. We have quarterly sharing meetings where we're all together, again, looking at data, the monthly reports, the progress meetings at the DOE, and just ongoing communication. We have many phone calls with one another and just touching base on how things are going. So I'm going to start with Broad Ripple Magnet High School. So I did not organize these as lead partners. Instead, I chose to organize them by schools because I think looking at the student data and the school data for each of the lead partners is really where we want to head. So we're going to start with Broad Ripple. And I'm going to talk about 2 lead partners at Broad Ripple. So first of all, we're going to talk about Scholastic, and I've got this organized to update you on their goals, and then the parts in green are actually the ongoing progress, so the items I'm going to share about how we're doing with those goals. Then after each session, looking at the goals, we're going to talk about our on-site monitoring, the strengths, the areas of concern, and the next steps, and also some data. So the first goal for Scholastic was to continue school-wide professional development to improve instruction. And so as you can see, 4 times per month, it's basically once a week. They have intentional topics aligned to their scope of work with professional development. They also adjust that based on the needs that they're identifying in their data and their classroom walkthroughs at their schools. And TNTP and Scholastic definitely work as partners there and communicate with one another to ensure that their professional development's aligned with each other's needs. Scholastic's second goal is implementation of high-impact strategies in literacy. So they have 4 items they've identified: engagement, comprehension, writing, and differentiated instruction. And you can see on the tool that they use, their Insight tool, and the rubric also that they use with Scholastic, that in August their baseline data for engagement was 1.65, comprehension was 1.87, writing was 1.72, and differentiated instruction was 1.65. The other numbers that you see are the ones that are currently for the latest rubric. So they haven't quite made the 1.0 gain that they propose in their benchmark, but with the exception of comprehension, they have made some gains in the other areas on their observations. Goal 3 is Read 180. They're providing academic interventions for students in math and reading. They're using Read 180 as their tool to do that. Their target was to have all students on their intervention for 15 minutes a day. They're currently at 18 minutes, so they're meeting that. They also want to increase the growth to 85% of the students showing a 50% Lexile growth, and that at least, actually all of their teachers are implementing it with fidelity. Last year they had 80% proficient. This year they want to have 100%. And then their 4th goal is deepen the building-wide leadership capacity. So it's working with the instructional leadership team, having professional learning communities. They have 100% that have completed all their individual growth plans for teacher leaders and using data effectively. So they're on track with that one, but certainly it's ongoing with the professional development piece with the leadership team. TNTP, their first goal, by the end of the school year, 100% of the administrators would be completing their observations and conferences within the required timelines. That has been met. Goal 2, by the end of the school year, that 90% of their administrators would rate a 2 out of 3 on scripting evidence, mapping evidence, and delivering effective feedback. Those are all components of the evaluation process. So they wanted to make sure their administrators were competent and that they were able to do those things. And they are currently on track with meeting that goal. They have 80% that have demonstrated proficiency on those. Goal 3, the administration at Broad Ripple will increase the rate at which they implement research-based strategies to increase retention of high-performing teachers. So this is actually the one that's not on track at this point. They had an insight survey in December, and then they followed up also with PD in March for the administrators to help them know how to use that survey data from December, because as you can see, there are 2 data points here that are a bit concerning. 29% of the teachers stated, leaders at my school work hard to retain effective teachers, and only 26% felt like effective or highly effective teachers plan to stay. So 26% have indicated they plan to leave this year or next year, which again is a much higher rate than what we would like to see. Goal 3 continued. So when asking why do those teachers want to leave, there are 3 main reasons they give. They say personal reasons, they say the learning environment, and then they say professional reasons not related to school. So obviously it's the learning environment that we have control over, and that's part of what our recommendations are to that. They continue to work on that environment and the behavior, which we'll talk about in a minute. So goal 4, by the end of the school year, teachers will increase their perception of effective feedback as being helpful to improve their instruction by 10% in 2 of the 3 survey questions. Again, this goal is on track, but you can see the percentages still would indicate there's a need for growth. So 38% indicate the feedback I get helps me improve outcomes. 39% stated the expectations for effective teaching are defined, and 44% say I get enough feedback on my instructional practice. So again, they've shown that 10% growth, but we would clearly like to see those percentages continue to grow. So then when looking at student enrollment at Broad Ripple, you can see that in the fall, in August, September, they had a student enrollment of 1,019. You can see in January, February, and March, they've been losing some students, and in March, they actually are down from their fall count to 946. And again, we know that has implications for student tuition support, so those are definitely concerning. Student attendance, and I'll have to read that to you because I just got that data yesterday, I think. So in March, the middle school had an attendance rate of 97.3, and the high school had an attendance rate of 96.55. So that's on track, and actually the last 3 months have all been above 95%, 97%, 96%. So that's on track with the state expectation of at least 95%. So looking at student suspensions, you can see that January, February was about a 6-week window. They had 28 suspensions, and then in March they had 58. Middle school, the pattern seems to be a student insubordination, and high school, skipping class. That's what's causing those to happen. Looking at staff attendance, again, it's an acceptable level, 98% in February, 97.95 in March. New hires are on track. They're hiring teachers. They're replacing them as they lose them. They do have a challenge of a lack of substitute teacher availability and quality. So the strengths, and this is again from our ongoing monitoring that we are bringing to you having been in the classrooms. So we're seeing that most classroom instruction is objective-driven. They are teaching to the objectives. The students are being given opportunities to practice learning. The district pacing guides are being used to drive instruction, and they are implementing the standards. Daily interventions are being used to respond to Acuity C data. They've been very intentional about that, and their data is being used consistently. They have ongoing professional learning in place, and we have met again right before spring break to regroup and make sure we had an effective short-term plan for the end of the year, a long-term plan then looking forward. And I think Scholastic, TNTP, and Broad Ripple, and the IPS administration have been working very closely to make sure that we are paying attention to early indicators and responding when there are issues. There's also an ECA focus that actually began this week, and they are strategically reteaching critical needs. There's a senior mentor program that's really pretty exciting. It's called Rocket Boosters, and it's being implemented. And I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit more, but basically it involves every senior, and every senior is paired up with another adult at the school, and they have weekly check-ins to make sure they're on track for graduation. So it's a great idea, and I'm glad to see them doing that. They also have very clearly communicated short-term and long-term priorities. So it's been a pleasure working with Scholastic because they stay on top of that. Areas needing developed. Again, this is from our monitoring visits, so this is actually being in the classrooms. We would tell you that they need to increase expectations for students. They need to improve consistency and implementation of procedures and routines to improve the learning environment, which would also increase the staff retention. So there are processes in place, but they're not always implemented with fidelity, and certainly not classroom to classroom building wide. So that's an area that we continue to talk about. They need to increase the rigor and relevancy. There are many kids that are pretty disengaged when you walk through classrooms, depending on classrooms, so we continue to talk about actively engaging students. That goes along with the next one, implementing a behavior modification plan. I know the school has plans this spring to begin looking at PBIS and potentially rolling that out this summer and next fall, and that would definitely be something they could benefit from. The next piece, improving student achievement results. I know that sounds like a given, but the fact is, unless all of this is resulting in improved achievement on ECAs, ISTEP, and AP, it really doesn't matter what programs we're putting in place. It has to be impactful. And so I included that because that's still an area that we need to see at Broad Ripple. We need to see these student achievement results as a result of the work we're doing increasing. Improving transitions between classes is needed and between instructional activities. There's still quite a bit of disorder, hallways, restrooms, classrooms at the beginning of class, that sort of thing. Improving follow-through of initiatives and then implementing all of our data-driven suggestions, strategies with fidelity and consistently is a need. So next step for Broad Ripple, and again, this from the last joint meeting we had in March, these were developed. So implementation of the short-term plan, and that means right now. They began an I-STEP 20-day blitz using acuity C analysis. They have interventions they put in place, data talks with students, tutorials for students, rewards for acuity progress. They have an ECA focus. They're beginning corrective instruction, and I believe that's from the IPS district. They're giving their principals some tools to do that. Strategic reteaching, focused, intentional plans are submitted every 2 weeks by teachers. The rocket boosters I explained to you, the weekly check-ins, and they also have a monthly graduation status update with their superintendent, which again, I think is a great idea, and I'm glad to see him doing that with the schools. There's behavior modification that's also needed, passing periods dismissal I talked to you about, study hall, and then PBIS is being considered for next year. The long-term plan looking forward, block scheduling for the middle school is being considered as a way to give the students more time in class, less transitions, but it will result in the need for professional development so the teachers know how to use that effectively. Also an after-school program for supporting students and providing additional instructional time outside the school day. The behavior intervention plan, PBIS, is being looked at for next year, and along with that, consistency from day one. So I think part of what we've seen all year long is a struggle to gain that consistency and to keep regrouping. So from day one next year, it would be important to just have that in place. And then ongoing professional development provided to the administration supporting retention strategies. Certainly having 26% of the teachers indicate that they are looking to leave in the next year or two is something we want to avoid. So I don't know if you want to take questions after each school or if you want me just to finish all three. That's kind of at whatever you would.
Why don't I entertain questions after each one?
Okay. So George Washington Community High School, as you know, George Washington have been acting kind of as their own lead partner using the 8-step process that we talked about last fall.
So are there any questions about Broad Ripple that we want to bring forth? I'm just going to make a comment. I have seen the monthly graduation status update with the superintendent in action.
Yes.
I saw it up in Gary, and I was very impressed that they were actually keeping track of all students and their credits, and the superintendent was coming like on a very regular basis to say how many do we have on target for graduation now, and what is it that we're putting in place to make that happen. So a very intentional piece to be sure that kids are being paid attention to in terms of making sure that they've got what they need in order to graduate.
Dr. Farabee and Dr. LeGrand and IPS have done a fabulous job of focusing their school leaders on ongoing targets that they're measuring and they're asking to report to monthly. So I think we'll see they're holding them accountable and giving them some benchmarks. Goal 1, and we're talking about George Washington, a comprehensive literacy initiative, implementing high-impact strategies and interventions to support students with instructional gaps to improve their reading comprehension in all content areas. So this year they have implemented reading apprenticeship, and the good part about that is it's actually taking the reading across the curriculum in all of their content areas as well, and they're working in teams to do that. They have teachers that have received acuity data and writing strategies, curriculum, professional development. As part of their 8-step process, they've created success groups. So they have 3-week cycles where they're pre-testing, post-testing, and then developing interventions, the success period, for students who are not meeting the needs or not meeting the benchmarks for those areas. They actually began that on October 28th, and I was there early days, the first week after they did that, and there were some growing pains, but they've actually gotten that down to a really good process now, and they've made some real gains on those success groups and their targeted intervention. They have an ECA boot camp for ECA retesters, and they also started in January a new English 12 class for ECA ELA retesters. So they're very strategically making sure they give students who are behind some extra support. Goal 2, instructional leadership development. So they're strengthening their administrative team and their leadership teams through intentional professional development. I would say that this is probably an area they need to continue to develop. They've had a lot of turnover, and certainly their leadership team and their teachers to build capacity. They have started a book study, Teach Like a Champion, but I'm sure they'll continue to work on that area as well.
Is the turnover in teachers or administrators or both?
I'm not sure with the administration change that was just proposed last month, how that impacts George Washington. I don't know if you guys can speak to that. If there, are you losing any there? Okay, and that's what I thought, but I almost, so there are two of the, both of the vice principals will not be back next year.
Are they leading the professional development effort? Is that what I
I'm sorry?
understand? Are they leading the professional development effort and
Just the
improvement?
school as a team to develop leadership capacity and how to share leadership around the school, because they have a lot of initiatives, and it's just having a structure in place where the teachers and the administrators are having a structure to facilitate their goals, their strategies, and so that it's not just one person trying to direct it, but they're all taking ownership in their school. So there's a need both with staff and administrators to do that. So they had ongoing 8-step training in February with a consultant, and they regrouped based on their data, and their teacher leaders continue to support the non-ELA and math teachers. So looking at their student data, actually their enrollment data is very consistent. They had 1,114 in the fall, they have 1,119 now. So they've gone up and down a little bit. You can see their October, January, and March totals, but their enrollment is actually pretty consistent. So looking at student attendance, again, when we talk about 95% sort of being a minimal expectation, I do have concerns about where their attendance is at the moment. They're falling about 93% consistently across the board, so student attendance is an area that needs to be continually monitored. Student suspensions, January, February, March, you can see the data. The last month, they had 168 student suspensions. So that, again, is an area that probably needs some attention. I know that they have a lot of behavior issues they're trying to manage, but that's a lot of suspensions for a month. Staff attendance is actually really good. They have 98% staff attendance pretty consistently across the board. They have a lot of new hires, as you can see. I think that was actually from this fall. I don't think that's been updated recently. So I guess you could probably answer that. For the 13 new hires wasn't this month. That was from the fall. That's what I thought. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so the strengths from the on-site monitoring visit. And our coordinator has been going there at least once or twice a month. And one of the things that she says is the staff really appears to be motivated to improve instructional practice. That wasn't always the case, but we have seen that improvement, and definitely a movement to more focused, data-driven instruction. The success periods are better differentiated. They're targeting more critical skills that they've identified on the acuity assessments. So they become a lot more data-driven. The acuity predictive C results also demonstrate a slight upward trend, predicting potentially improved ECA and ISEP results. George Washington was also included in an acuity DOE grant that we have, so they're getting actual professional development through a certified acuity trainer. There are a limited number of schools who get that in the state, about 50, and so we're glad to see that George Washington's taking advantage of that, and they're going to have that support. So areas needing developed, focused and intentional professional development I talked about. We need to continue that, particularly about effective instructional techniques, checking for understanding, actively engaging students, differentiating instruction during that core instruction. Building wide routines and procedures still need to be worked on. Hallway transitions are still an issue, not applied consistently from classroom to classroom. And then consistent parent and family involvement opportunities. We know that George Washington has a very rich level of community partners, and so we'd like to intentionally leverage the parent community piece as part of that as well. So next steps, developing and implementing a positive behavior intervention support program. Just like we said with Broad Ripple, George Washington definitely could use a more intentionally aligned PBIS system to improve consistency and develop incentives to motivate positive character traits and academic excellence. Also monitoring the instructional strategies and giving teachers immediate feedback on classroom walkthroughs and reinforcement. We know that that's really important for them to continue to do. And also modeling and providing staff with guidance and checking for understanding, actively engaging students and giving them feedback on that, because those are areas we continually see issues with. Continue to develop and consistently implement their 8-step. They started it in October. They had more feedback in February from a consultant. So just to continue to get better with that, using research-based intervention strategies. We also would like to see this sense of urgency improve with the students. So we know that they're having the data chats. They've created a culture. We want the students to own that data and improve that sense of urgency. We know the staff and the administrators have that, but the students really don't have that sense of urgency yet. So continue to use the data to intentionally and consistently improve instruction, institute a consistent venue for family and parent input, and then also a systematic way to review progress. So what are they doing to monitor on an ongoing basis the improvement towards their vision and mission? We feel like that needs to be more clearly defined as a process. And that's it on George Washington.
Any questions on George Washington? I will make a comment that schools, the high need for schools to have positive behavior intervention supports so that you can really maximize the engagement of the students and have their ownership of their own behavior. So I'm in total support of that, and it's a best practice that needs to be in place in all of our schools.
So John Marshall Community High School. I'm going to start off with goal number 1, administrators and staff increasing the effectiveness with school operations. So that's been kind of an issue at John Marshall, getting their schedule, their duties, their people in the right places. That's been an ongoing issue, and they've really worked this year to support student learning and to have the operations in place for school to be successful from the first day. They've done a lot of regrouping, and I'm going to talk about that. John Marshall continues to be in a state of transition. They had a new principal that just started on February 17th. Her name's Ashana Short, and Dr. Farabee and Dr. LeGrand knew her from their previous district. She came in, she's had experience with turnaround work, and I think what I hear from our lead partners is that we have a culture of hope now coming in at John Marshall. So the results and the information I'm giving you may not be where we are today, because in the last month they've had a significant transition. So I want to give you that sort of disclaimer. So the staff surveys were administered each quarter, and then they use those results to drive the instructional leadership team priorities. They have regular meetings. The new principal has reorganized the leadership team, and she meets weekly with each of them. Goal 2, a quarterly and comprehensive professional development plan being implemented and evaluated. And I feel like this is really one of Voyager's strengths. They do a lot with professional development and working with their schools. So they have professional learning communities occurring weekly, led by coaches and the lead partners, faculty meetings twice a month on high impact strategies. They have bell ringers they just implemented in November as a response to getting class started on time and not wasting instructional time. So they have bell ringers, and then they have data they collect from that. They have data chats with staff twice each month, formative assessments, teacher evaluation training instituted. The teachers just, since Mrs. Short has arrived, have participated in 6+1 writing training, acuity data use training, and corrective instruction. So she's really hit the ground running, and she's providing the staff a lot of leadership. Goal 3 is about the master schedule. So the master schedule needed to be refined to create opportunities for students, to impact the ELA content on their exam, to increase collaborative time between the high school and middle school staff, also to provide opportunities for students to practice technology, to provide them highly targeted support during the school hours for intervention, and to just provide students time in the day to have Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction for students who are further behind. As a response to that, the PLCs and faculty meetings are now standing meetings on all Wednesdays, and Ms. Short just changed that up. She's also targeted students who will participate in tutoring during the school day and after school. The Acuity C data, which was just the one that was administered a month or two ago, is being used for identification. Teachers are being hired to provide focused tutoring for students that are seniors needing to pass one or both ECAs. So they've actually targeted that senior group as their first level of support. Goal number 4, ELA and math instruction to include the appropriate learning strategies, standards, and then having a plan for students who do not master the content. They have weekly PLCs, assistance with lesson planning. They have a new monitoring of their lesson plans with the new principal, and implementing corrective instruction that they just started since spring break ended. They've also implemented effective discipline management and student support systems this year for their staff. This is actually probably their biggest area of need still. So they have new procedures implemented and monitored. Their student assistance team, I know last fall as we talked, they were just beginning to group them in November, which was a bit late, but they're using that to provide their intentional support to kids. And I'm going to talk about discipline data to kind of highlight what I mean about being concerned about goal number 6. Goal number 7, there are proactive structures for increasing positive and productive communication with parents and community members. The new principal has implemented a system to update the website and to get communication out. I also feel like this is an area of strength. The counselors have been active in supporting the at-risk seniors. The students have been given support to help them with transition plans after high school. They've sat down, helped them fill out applications. They've visited post-secondary institutions. They've helped them register for the ACT. They even had quarterly graduation information sessions for parents and students that are seniors. So I think they've really done a great job of working on that one. So now looking at the data, the student enrollment, as you can see, is also pretty consistent here. They had a fall data point of 973, and they're currently at 980. So they're pretty consistent with their enrollment. Student attendance is actually a pretty big concern. Again, if we're looking at 95% as our target, as a minimum target, and you can see that the attendance for students has been fairly low, particularly in March.
May.
On that, what interventions do they have in place right now?
For
Attendance.
the attendance. I'm going to ask Annette. Annette, you want to talk about that? Annette is the lead partner with Voyager.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annette. Work with Ms. Short.
Could you step up to the podium, please, just for the benefit of the folks watching from home?
First, let me say it is truly a new day at John Marshall. We have a lot of things going on there. Ms. Short is a real dynamo, and she's been there since the 17th, and she has gotten things in place, and they are now implementing them. And it is taking accurate attendance in class every day, every period, and holding people accountable for doing that. That's step 1. And then identifying students that are not coming to school and reaching out, using your social workers, using your counselors systematically, and tracking the students and following back up on it. It's the hard work. It's not the fun work. It is the hard work that she and her staff are now doing, and those things are in place, and they are happening today.
And so when did she come to the school?
February 17th.
February.
So next, I'd like to look at the suspension data. And as I shared with you a bit earlier, I'm very concerned actually about these numbers. So as you can see, in October, November, and March, in March alone, 356 days of student suspension for the less than 1,000 kids that go.
So let me ask a question. So in the previous 2 schools, we don't have the word days after it. So is this the
Yes.
number of student suspensions, or is this, why is this reported in a little different way?
That's the way they reported it from John Marshall. So I just took their information and put it in here. I believe, I'm going to say that on the 56 or whatever Broad Ripple and the 140-something, I think, George Washington, that it would also be days. But I'm going to ask if is that correct?
Actually, that's what I
Actual,
think.
like incidents.
Student
So
suspensions.
140, so a number of incidents.
So I would appreciate having the actual number of student suspensions be reported to us for John Marshall,
That the same?
rather than the number of days
That
total that have
356.
been suspended.
that number would be a lot less because it could be
Correct.
one student received 10 days of suspension
Correct.
for
And
something.
that's what I'd like to see.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you.
So looking at staff attendance, at John Marshall, we have about 96% the last couple of months for attendance. And they're on track with hires too. They had a bit of a problem filling positions a few months ago, but I believe that they're on track now with their hires, and they're up to date with that. So from the on-site monitoring, the strengths, certainly the new principal beginning on February 17th has been a strength. They have intentional communication of high expectations. The new principal has brought that to them. It's everywhere you go in the school. It's posted. It's in their newsletters, their weekly meeting, the daily communication. She's being very clear about high expectations. Greater articulation of academic expectations also coming from her. Increased communication with parents. And it's been described as a climate in the building of one of hope. They have new hallway procedures, new class routines, new bell ringers, a tracking system for discipline, and better monitoring of classroom instruction. They've also implemented interventions in math and ELA, and they are using data to drive instruction at a much higher level. Areas needing developed, and consistency. So John Marshall has really lacked consistency. So hopefully with their new leader, that will help them get on track with that, and they will be able to implement their routines and procedures across the building. Increasing active learning opportunities for kids. Whole group instructional model is not providing differentiation, and so we see learner engagement as a continuing issue. Also continuing to work on intervention plans for students. Some staff are diverting their focus too often due to student behavior issues. Implementing, again, a PBIS or behavior modification plan. I know the principal's working on that, and to continue to do that would be important. Improving transitions between classes and between activities, because there's still a lot of downtime. The next step for John Marshall definitely is consistency. Consistency in instructional practices and consistency in discipline. Continuing intentional professional learning plans to assist the staff in their areas of need. Peer modeling or offering staff observation of effective teaching practices, they really could use that. Mentors for new teachers or those struggling with classroom management. And more involvement of parents and community in the decision-making process are things that we've noted. So I'd like to end before I take questions by just expressing my appreciation and gratitude to Scholastic, to Voyager, Cambium Learning, TNTP, the IPS District Office. We truly have worked as partners, and what I've shared with you today is an honest assessment of where things stand. So we know there are things that are going well, we've seen some improvement, and we know we have challenges and some next steps that we're all working on, but we're aware of them. So we're letting you know what they are too, so you know what we know, the work. We know what we're working on.
And I want to add that I'm excited that outreach has been so involved with the schools, alongside with the partners, in making sure that things happen. That was our intent from the start, and I'm glad to see such a thorough report given to us on progress. Any questions for Teresa, David?
Thanks for your presentation, and I'm really impressed by the systemic plan that each of our partners has put together with a set of goals and a baseline and so forth and so on, target. It really makes a lot of sense to me, and I would hope every school in the state of Indiana has that kind of strategic planning so that we have a vision of where each school is going. But that's a local level concern, so I'm calling out local school board superintendents, principals to do that. My question deals with us on the state board and our responsibility to share the good things that are going on. I'm sure there's a set of key principles that have been applied by our partner schools to turn around these schools. And my question is, what mechanism do we have at the state level to share some of these core principles? I'll call them best practices. What are we doing to share that with all schools in Indiana?
You're actually,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll let you respond, but you're actually going to hear quite a bit about that initiative under letter D, school intervention supports and funding. So you're going to hear about an entire process to do just that statewide, but I'll let Teresa respond on behalf of what she's working with.
Okay. I would tell you that we work with 303 focus and priority schools in outreach in particular, and we use the turnaround principles, the 8 turnaround principles. consistently the same language, the same support, the same professional developments offered to all of those schools as we're doing our monitoring visits and as we created the student achievement plan, which they gave back to us in February, and we've been following up since school grades were issued. So I think one of the things that I've seen from the monitoring visits the outreach staff has done is that they have been able to take statewide what we know are best practices in turnaround. And so in not these schools, not necessarily, but all focus and priority schools are getting that level of attention. And I have heard back from a number of superintendents and a number of principals how much they're really gaining from those visits, because our staff have been trained by the department specialists in data analysis, effective teacher ratings, I mean, all those things, they understand it at a really high level, much higher than I even anticipated last summer. They've really gotten it and picked it up. And then they're able to convey that in a unified message across the state. So it's been, it's far exceeded my expectations on what we really could do at a local level using our state staff.
The question I have is regarding the outreach coordinators, and at first I was envisioning them as helpers, and they seem to have gone a little beyond that by actually doing some assessment, which I particularly don't mind. I think there's a lot of talent there that can do that. Has that caused any kind of a question at all?
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because we struggle with that. You know, we see ourselves as support people,
Right.
but then also now we're monitoring, right? So we're inside, we know what the real story is, we live in your community, and now we're going to monitor. So one thing that we've been really careful about intentionally is that as we're going in, we want to provide them the support, and we're coaches. So we're not coming in and offering them, you know, kind of that big brother presence. What we're saying to them is, we're partners in this. We care about these schools in our communities being successful. And so here's what we know, and we're going to give you honest feedback. And so they do. They give them honest feedback. And the schools are saying to us that for the first time, they really have meaningful conversations about teaching and learning, and it's helping them get better because we're being honest, right? So they may not like sometimes, because we have surveys we send out after each visit. So sometimes they may not like some of that honest feedback because it's looking in the mirror. But we're giving it to them, and I think it's helping them get better. So we have to have courage to do it, and I think we do.
So having the same person monitor what's going on and also helping,
That's right.
mentoring at the same time, that has not become an issue at
You
all.
know, it really hasn't. I think because of the attitude that we're going in with, I think it could. It potentially did, and I was really worried about that. But one of the things I stressed to them is that, you know, for example, they submitted their student achievement plans. And I stressed with the team that as they get them, if they have concerns about them, don't turn around and send them right back to them with red marks on them and say, this isn't good. Instead, when you have your visit, sit down and help them do it with you. They did the best they knew how to do. So sit down with them and help them do it. You're their coach, you're their guide. So I think it's the manner in which we're going into the schools that's helping us accomplish both at the same time.
Thank you, and thank your staff, at least from me, that I think they're doing a wonderful job. I was able to meet the person in my congressional district, and she's just a wonderful person and a top educator. And I'm highly impressed with the model, and thanks to the state superintendent for implementing the concept early on. It's been a really fabulous program, and the feedback I'm getting is very positive also.
Thank you. We appreciate that, and I would absolutely agree with that. And I want to thank again our lead partners, because this took a lot of courage for us to come up here and be honest with you too, and we felt like it was important to do that.
Dan?
I want to, excuse me, I want to point out to our friends, and I want to make a public commendation. Over the years, and I've been on the board for a number of years, we sent teams to these schools that had chronic rates of failure over a lot of years. And it was interesting as we did it, and I think, Tony, you were here for most of those reports and maybe a few others. But we were often struck by the lack of response, seeming interest, I'm sure they were interested, but hands-on response from some of the leadership. And I want to make a public commendation of Dr. Farabee and the superintendent. This is very different, to know what's happening, to get the some of the review teams we sent into schools that were failing. We didn't get a lot of response, or it was ignored, even the meetings or the visits. And it was a desperate attempt by this board to help and come to understand and set forth an improvement, because the children in these neighborhoods needed it badly. And I just have seen a lot of signs that Dr. Farabee, one of our largest, if not the largest district in the state, is setting a great pace as a leader, and I think it needs to be recognized. What's happening here and the progress is a leadership issue, it's a teacher commitment issue, and everybody working together. So that needs to be said at this public forum.
Thank you. And absolutely, I would agree. It's been definitely a collaborative relationship, and they've been extremely responsive to any suggestions that we've made. And we're sitting at the table with them frequently, and they want to be there.
Gives
So-
everybody great hope. Thank you. So-
And Dr. Farabee and I are on speed dial with one another. So we converse frequently. Thank you very much, Teresa. Our next item on the agenda is the aggregate teacher evaluation report. Sarah and Risa Renee from the department, if you would. I'd like to point out, as already has been pointed out, this is the very first time that we have even gathered this type of data. It is based on the 2012-13 school year, and only those school districts and schools who actually had in place an evaluation system that complied with the law. So we have about 60 schools that do not have that such evaluation in place, nor does this encompass charter schools, because they were not required to have an evaluation system in place in accordance with the law. They will be coming up because a law was just passed that they will have that opportunity to make sure that they have an effective rating system in place. So with that, Sarah, we look forward to your quick presentation.
In front of you, you have spreadsheets with all of the data that the department received from the districts. We opened the DOE ER data collection on November 15th and kept it open until February 14th. So they had 4 months to report the data to us and revise or edit that whenever they saw possible. Then we reported it out by district, by school, and then by teacher prep program of graduates. You can't compare the school data with the corporation data because, as you know, there may be a teacher that works in multiple buildings, so they're only reported once on the corporation data. But when you look at the school data, they'll be reported in each school that they are working in. We also used Elvis, which is our online licensing, to map the years of experience for those teachers. So through the CP report, districts report, staff personnel numbers, and then their years of experience, we mapped that back for 3 years. And just to make a note, when you look at the teacher prep data, remember this is year 1 experience, year 2 and 3. It's not over a 3-year period, so you can't kind of see trend data in it yet. And some of the teacher prep programs too, even though the bar graphs are the same size, they may have only 20 educators, while some may have 150 to 200. So just to keep that in mind.
And I'll comment here that we also are going to be collecting data, according to a recent bill that was passed, to do it in this 3-year cycle. And so we decided to do the first time in the same manner that we're going to be required to do from now on, which is to look at the first-year teachers, the second-year teachers, and the third-year teachers.
Are there any questions that you have over the data? Yes.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The teacher education data, is that going to be used in the process of reaccreditation of colleges of education?
Well,
This data?
first, this is all educators, and I want to make sure that's correct too. So it is any certified for the educators for the school and district, it's all educators. So superintendents, principals, counselors, anyone that
When
needs a
certified.
license. Yes, certified. So for the teacher prep, do you want to comment on?
The NCATE National Accreditation is moving to CAPE.
Right.
And CAPE will be looking at a lot of data points for accreditation, and I think evaluation data is going to be something that the teacher prep programs are encouraged to look at and to incorporate into program improvement under those national standards. So in the future, they will be looking at trend data and at at much more detailed data than the data that we've given you. The data we've given you is simply to meet the statutory reporting requirement that we have under the evaluation law. Under House Enrolled Act 1388 that the superintendent referred to, which was just passed by the General Assembly, we will be providing a lot more detailed teacher prep program completer data, including evaluation data, in the future back to the teacher prep institutions so that they can use that to input into program improvement.
It's my understanding through some current legislation in Indiana that the whole system of accreditation is being looked at, and in particular what quality indicators are being put into that. I understand there's some legislation regarding some kind of an assessment matrix on every institution, and there's a lot of questions on that. That's why I'm giving you
Sure.
the opportunity to be transparent and
Sure.
share that publicly.
Well, I can be transparent about what we know about the statute. It was just passed. It's in 1388, and it does require over the next 2 to 3 year period that the department will be working with major stakeholders to develop standards and benchmarks for program improvement, and to also set up what the statute refers to as a matrix rating system. But then the statutory language goes on to say that this system will not compare or rank or rate programs against each other. So I think really we're looking at a matrix system where we look at performance of the programs on a number of different data points and a number of different standards. And frankly, because that was just passed recently, we haven't yet started figuring out what that might look like. We haven't had any stakeholder meetings yet on that. So we're doing research right now as to whether there are other states that have a similar kind of system that we could look at. So, you know, I want to be transparent on it, but I can tell you that we really haven't started that work yet because the legislation just came into effect. In fact, it becomes effective July 1.
What's your projected timeline for bringing it before the board for some kind of action for approval or some other action? Are we
Well,
looking out about 6 months, a year, 2 years?
You know, I need to look at the statutory language to see what parts of it require board action, because not all of the parts of it require board action. So we need to really look at that and figure out what it is that we need to bring to you. But I would say we probably won't be ready to start bringing anything any sooner than 6 months, but that's just a guess.
Thank you.
So I want to, were you done, Sarah? Okay, so I want to point out something in the information that you've gotten, because there's been a lot of questions about this, especially out in the press, and that's regarding capturing the number of ineffective teachers. And so I want to point out that there's a category of which is reported to us. What's required to be reported is the actual ratings of teachers, okay? So they actually have a rating. And so many ineffective teachers, they see the writing on the wall before the evaluation process is ever completed, and they don't have an actual end rating. And so they are captured, and we won't know how much of them are captured there, or the number, but they're captured in that NA category that we gave that to you, because those are the resignations, the retirements that happened before the actual ratings were completed. So you need to understand, I think the public needs to understand, that we're never going to be able to capture all of the ineffective teachers within that category, because they don't stick around to get that final rating, which is good, because we don't want ineffective teachers teaching in our classrooms. And to just give a personal story, you know, I've worked with a lot of teachers, not a lot, but I've worked with the teachers that were in that category, so to speak, that actually, you know, I worked with them and they said, you know, I just need to resign, or I just need to retire. And that's readily accepted by the school corporations, as it should be. So I just want to let you know that the data that you see here will continue to not capture all of the numbers that people are expecting to see. Brad?
First of all, thank you very much for the data, and it was interesting, this being a baseline year, and I think it's reasonable that people are going to ask questions, and so I want to raise three just rhetorically. I'm not really looking for an answer. I would hope somebody will research this, because as we roll this out now, we start to think about how this data now feeds in potentially, as Dr. Freitas was saying, into decisions about the effectiveness of teacher preparation programs, for example. You want to know that data is spot on, and there's been a lot of questions raised about how much can we trust the data. And I do think, for the most part, I think the majority of our teachers, they are effective. But I do think it's reasonable when you see the kind of percentage we're seeing to ask some questions. And here's three that I'm wrestling with right now. I hear from the field that because there is no way to provide compensation for anybody that's marked needs improvement or less, a lot of building principals are concerned about marking them in their first 2 years at that level because essentially they're going without a pay raise. That's not something that DOE can necessarily do about it, but I think it's something we have to ask a question about is, do we have an inherent flaw in a system that could cause somebody to receive an effective score simply because somebody doesn't want to see them hurt pejoratively because they're not receiving compensation? So that's a question I'm wrestling with. Two, there was confusion clearly this year around with what happened with the I-STEP testing. I went out to the site because I wanted to see what kind of resource materials we had, and there's still a RISE 2.5 manual out there that says locally you can drop that percentage down, and I think we need to appreciate what's the impact of that, even though there was clarification from the DOE saying we're still RISE 2.0. If you go out there today, the manual says RISE 2.5, the examples in the DOE site are RISE 2.5, and I don't think the board ever said or affirmed RISE 2.5. So I'm questioning, do we know and appreciate how that impacted it? And then thirdly, has to do with how well our principals feel confident in using the tool, because the tool will only ever be as good as the people and the training they receive. And I know there's been some efforts on that, but even going back to teacher preparation, what can we do to make sure we strengthen that even in the principal preparation program? There's a real understanding of how to use the tool well, particularly with regard to writing growth comments. Because one of the things I'm concerned that I hear is that if you have a principal that is not feeling confident in terms of their ability to articulate a corrective action plan, the likelihood of them addressing it, confronting it and addressing it, it's likely to take a pass. So those are just some questions, things I'm wrestling with. I'd like to see the board work with the department to study as we look at this baseline, because when you have high stakes A to F ratings for schools, when you have A to F potentially for teacher prep programs, I think it puts a responsibility on the board and even the department to make sure that data, we feel comfortable that it is accurate.
Yes, Gordon?
I'm not a teacher, and there are those here that can speak to the intricacies of these evaluations better than I. But I find it hard to believe that a system of evaluation where only a handful of people are said to need improvement is accurate or effective. This feels a little bit like Indiana's Lake Wobegon moment. And as a member of this board, I believe we need to look into how this happened and figure out a better way to make sure that teachers who are the best in our classrooms get that recognition, and the teachers who need improvement get the assistance they need. This isn't fair to our kids and parents, and most of all, it's not fair to our teachers. You all know by now that I have a natural dislike for the word system, and this is why. Clearly the system failed, and we have to figure out a new way to get accurate, fair results for our teachers so that we can continue to improve our schools and students' experiences in the classroom.
Carrie?
I want to tie maybe both of what they've said together in that as I was driving down this morning and have talked with other teachers about the system too, to what Brad said, we have a system set up where it's punitive. If you aren't a 3 or a 4, you don't get a raise. And in some school corporations, you haven't gotten a raise for 5 years. And so, there's this feeling of we have to give everybody a good score so that people finally get a cost of living adjustment. I mean, it's sad but true. When you haven't had a raise in 5 years, inflation's gone up, you're getting paid less than you were 5 years ago. And so there's that. There's also then, so we want to rate them well. On the other hand, if we really use RISE the way it's intended, it was supposed to help teachers who are struggling get the support that they needed so that they could be a better teacher for our kids. Our kids deserve the best. And someone who's just learning, a first-year teacher has this huge learning curve to overcome. Should they not get a pay raise? Absolutely not. They deserve a pay raise for a cost of living even adjustment. At the same time, do they need some support? Do they need some built-in guidance and professional development? Absolutely. And so there's this catch of, but if I don't rate them highly, they don't get a raise. But if I do rate them highly, it looks like they don't need support. And so I think, you know, we've kind of have this system that is being used for two different purposes, and I don't know that it really should be used for both purposes, because if we were really going to do it honestly, there would be a lot more teachers who need support and help. And I'm not saying they're not trying. I'm not saying they're not great people. I'm not saying they don't love kids, but they need help because, again, maybe it's a first-year teacher who just needs help. But at the same time, then we don't want to punish them and say, shame on you, you never get help again, because you would openly admit you need some work. And so we have to find what is the real goal of the evaluation system.
Carrie, and I could not agree more with all of those comments. I actually expected the needs improvement category to be much larger. I know when I was a first-year teacher, I was probably going to be in that needs improvement category. The compensation piece definitely interferes with making that happen and getting a real picture of what that might look like. I think all your comments are well taken, and that will take legislative action. All of that's tied together in law. So conversation would need to take place with our legislators regarding that. So in that, I took a look, and in my statement, I really wanted to look at the trend of highly effective, because I consider the highly effective educators that are in our buildings having the capability of turning around a school. So we just talked about a principal change at one of our schools in IPS. And believe me, having a highly effective person in a leadership role and teacher leaders within that school can affect change like no other. And so what I was very interested in the trend is that, schools that are in that A category had 32% of their teachers rated as highly effective. And then and it was a downward trend. Totally, even in our first year of gathering this baseline data, 11% rated highly effective in the schools that are in desperate need of some improvement in that F category. So to me, it's a lot about making sure that our effective teachers are becoming highly effective, making sure that we are hiring practices of teachers as we can that are going to have that kind of effect, and also making sure that we are looking at the retention issue. And that was the second issue that I was most concerned about, because when you look at the improvement necessary, the ineffective, and those not receiving a rating because they've left, a great many of them, what does that say? And there was an exact trend, from the A schools to the F schools. It's 20%. If you put those categories together in the F schools, and that's a lot of turnover that's occurring. And we have retention of teachers, which continually becomes an issue when you're trying to do school improvement and we heard some of that today, concerns about retention in the schools and the teachers that were going to be remaining there that were effective and highly effective already identified in their building. So we have a lot of work to do. I would agree wholeheartedly. Local schools, I think, will go back and take a look at their evaluation systems. They're going to take a look at what they do, but I think there are barriers in the way that are confusing how this works, and we need to speak out about that. I would agree. Yes, Dan?
When we come together on agendas, we're going to need to keep unpacking this. I'd like to know the role of the confusion about RISE that was created by the department. I'd like to know those timelines. I'd also like to see a correlation of these ratings vis-a-vis schools. So we see a school, let's say, with all the teachers are effective or highly effective. What were their I-STEP passage rates? What was the school grade? And I'd like to have that lined out nicely, because there should be a correlation by these teachers that are effective and highly effective in excellent schools, because they are very important. That would help, I think, let's just look at the information, let's study. And then let's also look at the clarity of instruction to schools, and let's also talk to schools. We can unpack this. What was their understanding, what they were supposed to use, and percentage of student performance? Because ultimately, student learning outcomes is what we're after. We'll keep this on the agenda, look at our role, clarity of leadership, look at the data, maybe talk about the issues for a first 2 or 3 year teacher, maybe cost of living continues if they need improvement, and we could look at those refinements, but I don't think that's the major issue. I'm interested to see the data, and we should see a correlation, really, schools that children are achieving at high levels should have high achieving teachers. If there's a reverse factor there, we'll just want to unpack that, want to understand it. Thank you.
So Sarah, did we basically do that when we broke it down into the A, B, C, D, and F categories? I believe we've done that for you. And because the I-STEP is the driving measure in the grades that we assign to schools.
It depends what percent of student achievement was used in the performance evaluation is all, and that's what I'd like to know too with that.
Yeah, that's a local decision, Dan, so,
It'll be interesting information, so I hope we can get it.
all right, the next item. Oh, sorry, Tony, didn't see your hand.
I was just wondering, are the principals or schools affected by the outcomes here? Like how many highly effective teachers you have or effective? Does that in any way factor into how we're doing the accountability grade, or does it factor into principal compensation or anything like that?
Our compensation policy we have now, which I think we've all been kind of talking about, is specific to teachers.
Okay.
So anyone that's classified as a teacher under state law.
And are we factoring into our accountability grade, like how many highly effective teachers are there?
No, for like the A through F grading system,
Yeah.
no. This data does
No.
not go into that.
No.
Can I ask a question? Tony, is your question, is the principal's evaluation based on what percentage of teachers are in each category? That's a different question.
We're generally trying to understand if there's any self-interest involved in terms of how they would.
No, and I believe most schools actually have paralleled their administrative evaluation as, to be in parallel with the teacher evaluation system. So they have a rating that they kind of do on their own too. But they do have ratings, because this data includes administrators and teachers. So they have a parallel evaluation system as well.
I'm sure, I don't know, it's probably not uniform, but I know some systems, principals hire their own teachers, and some systems, they come from a central office. So I was just thinking, if I was a principal, am I going to be looked at by the board or superintendent if I actually say I have 20% of teachers that need improvement? That may reflect somehow on what I've done. So.
I don't know that we could speak to that, yeah. All right, any others? Thank you. All right, we are going to take a lunch break before we begin our school intervention supports and funding. So what's your pleasure, to recess until 12:35? Does that sound good? All right, we are in recess till 12:35. Thank you very much.